am glad to see you all today for our second installment of the lectures on parables of Rabbi Jesus. And we had to spend some time yesterday, to explain why Jesus is the Rabbi, and I think that part is clear. And that determines us the approach to the parables, because unlike the Old Testament, when there's only one reasonable approach to understand the books is through understanding the history of the ancient Near East. You know, it says Assyria, we need to know what Assyria is. It says Egypt, we need to know what Egypt is. With the New Testament, there are two very diametrically different approaches. A very traditional historic Christian approach is do it through the Greek philosophy and applying allegorical method. The other approach, which I'm trying to introduce you to, is the approach of the natural way, rabbinic way, because this is who Jesus was, and this is who who the disciples were. In fact, Jesus' main Great Commission was to actually go and make the disciples. And so we talked about the parables as the main tool. It's like a scale, like an etude in the music, which trains the brain of the Bible student to discern spiritual things. And I have introduced you to the first out of three types of parables. It's a parable with interpretation. And it is important to recognize and to find the interpretation of the parable which Jesus provides. We cannot interpret the parable or the verse as we wish. Very often there are people who would make a statement like this: "Oh, this is your interpretation of the Bible, and this is his interpretation of the Bible." And my reply to this kind of statements is, well, I don't try to interpret the Bible. I really want to read the Bible, and when we, unlike the attempt to interpret a single verse from the Bible, I want us to be able to read the Bible in its context. And this is what the parables are. So a typical mistake, as I was given to you a heads up for today's presentation, is trying to read a verse from the parable out of context. And typical example is Matthew 25:29. "For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have abundance. But from him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away." This is a foundation for a popular Christian theory of prosperity gospel. which in essence is if you're wealthy and healthy, it means God is blessing you. But if you happen to be poor and sickly, it means God doesn't bless you. It was almost 27 years ago when I and a girl who would later become my wife went to visit a lady. If I say she was quadriplegic, I say nothing, because she had every joint of her limb was plagued with the infectious deformative arthritis, which basically gave her absolutely zero range of motion with any single part of her body. And so, of course, the disease like this doesn't come at once. It progressed, and while this was progressing, her mom would bring different preachers and groups to pray for her healing. And so the prayers did not seem to have any effect. And so these pastors would say to this lady that it was her fault that their prayers don't work. And so, because they believed that she belonged to the category who doesn't have. What a wrong representation of Jesus. I can tell you one thing. Even though she was in a terrible physical stage and suffering every single day of her life, being motionless, depending fully on her husband, she became a blessing for so many people. Her house was a refuge to those who were seeking Christ and who was persecuted in the families and under other circumstances. That's why, what exactly does this parable mean? For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he who has abundance, and he will have abundance. But from him who doesn't have, even what he has will be taken away. This is actually a tail end of the parable of talents. A parable which has many, I would say, enigmas in it, and people struggle to interpret it. So let's go to the very beginning of the parable, which is in Matthew chapter 25, verse 14. And let's read it. The parable is well known. For the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country, who called his servants, and delivered his goods to them. And to one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, each according to his own ability, and immediately went away on a journey. Well, before we continue any further, I would like to clarify what a talent actually is. I know what we think of a talent. Our singers and musicians definitely had a talent, and you enjoy their singing. Even some of you did not understand the Russian song, but you enjoyed the talent. But this is not what the text speaks about. In fact, in Russian language, there is a saying about someone who dug his talent into the ground. I don't know if that one exists in English, but I spent 7 years learning piano. I thought I succeeded. I played Beethoven, I played Bach, I played Grieg, I played all kinds of different music at my graduation performance concert. But for whatever reason, playing the keyboard or piano in front of the people was making me so nervous. I prefer to speak with no breaks for 24 hours than play one piece for 24 seconds. Even though at home I could learn it and know how to play it, as soon as I sit on that piano in front of the group of people, I'll forget everything. And that's why, even though I played well and I aced on my graduation exam, I came home, I didn't play a single piece on that grand piano we had, and I got involved in physics. And so some people say, "Oh, Sasha, you dug your talent into the ground." Maybe, I don't know. But this is not what the parable of the talents is all about. Talent in Greek is a measure of weight. In fact, talent was the measure of money. So a talent of gold is 80 pounds of gold. And if you go to a COMEX gold exchange or mercantile exchange, and you check the average price for a triple ounce of gold, you will discover that, I'm not going to do the calculations, but I've calculated that 1 talent of gold would be worth about $1.5 million. So he's talking money. This parable is about money. It's absolutely true. And so, let's continue to read. And I'm back in verse 16. Then he who had received the 5 talents went and traded with them and made another 5 talents. Whoa. That's definitely good. And then he who had received 2 talents gained 2 more. But he who had received 1 went and dug it in the ground and hid his Lord's money. See, in New King James it stays right away. That's Lord's money. And so, after a long time, the Lord of those servants came and settled accounts with them. So he who had received 5 talents came and brought 5 other talents, saying, Lord, you delivered to me 5 talents. Look, I have gained 5 more talents besides them. His Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. He who had received 2 talents came and said, Lord, you delivered to me 2 talents. Look, I have gained 2 more talents besides them. His Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over few things. I will make you ruler of many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord." Then he who had received 1 talent came and said, "Lord, I knew you were a hard man, reaping where you haven't sown, and gathering where you haven't scattered seed. I was afraid and went and hid your talent in the ground. Look, here is what is yours." That's an interesting parable. And I can tell you, I really am I'm a sympathizer of the third servant. You know why? I'm not really good at doing business and multiplying the money. I know how to balance my checkbook at my home. I know how to receive a paycheck every month. I know how to pay bills, how to put into savings. But taking the money and multiplying this, I admire those people who know how to do it. But I am not that kind of a person. I don't know. Somebody comes and gets the gain of 100%. I look every 6 months at my 403k. Maybe now it's doing 8%? And a few years ago it was barely making 1%. And then and it could lose. I don't know how to make 100%. I don't know if somebody today, I can imagine if somebody today received a windfall of, maybe some billionaire uncle remembered about the poor nephew and give you, $2 million. And now you are building a big plan and you need this 2 million be invested nicely to be able to pay for all your children and grandchildren college. And so you go to financial advisor and you say to financial advisor, "Oh, I want to invest with 100% return on this 2 million. I know what your advisor will tell you. Try your luck in Las Vegas. And you may lose. Yeah, but you see, it's not realistic. It's not realistic. For most of the people, average people, it's not realistic. So these two guys turning $7.5 million into 15, and then the other turning $3 million into 6, really good. I can't do like them. I'm just a simple specialist who knows how to do my job and want to receive a regular paycheck for my job and live an average life with this. I don't need to be super rich. I am happy with what I have. Well, think of this way. I imagine myself something working for a company, some nice family-owned firm, and the boss, the owner is very good, gives me a Sabbath, gives me raises whenever needs, gives me vacation, and I'm treating my job very responsible, and he values me. And we work like this for 10 years, 20 years. So one day, in a rainy, cold night, I hear the knock on my door. Who is that? Ooh, that's my boss. Okay, come in. What brings you in? Tell me. Well, he has a briefcase. And he tells me, you know what? I have spent with this company. I founded this company. I've spent with this company 35 years of my work. I sacrificed my family time. I owe to my wife, to my children. This is what I decided to do. I'm going to take a 6-month vacation and go on a round-the-world cruise. But I don't want the company to go down. So you are the person I know. I trust you with the company pension fund, which I want you to manage and invest. If I don't have a heart attack right away, I would be thinking, what am I supposed to do now? If I invest $1.5 million somewhere wrong, and it plunges 10%, where am I going to get $150,000 to pay it back? I know what I'm going to do. I am going to rent a safe deposit box in the bank with my own money. I'm going to put the briefcase there and let this briefcase sit in this security box. And so I'll come every day to check on it. So then the boss comes, and I'll just give it to him. Because being responsible for multiplying the money, this is not what I am trying to do in my life. Tell me, what have I done wrong? Tell me, where am I thinking? What's wrong in my thinking here? Well, I tell you, this is what the Lord answers to that servant. You wicked and lazy servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. So you ought to have deposited my money with the bankers, that that at my coming I would receive back my own with interest. You would get a negative interest, and I would have to pay for this. No. So, verse 28, take the talent from him and give it to him who has 10 talents. Please, do so. He will do much better. For to everyone who has, more will be given. That's fine. I don't need any more of this responsibility. But from whom who does not have, even that will be taken away. Yeah, I'm happy with this. But the verse 30, this is what I just don't understand. And cast the unprofitable servant into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For what? Tell me, for what? What have I done? Did I try to steal? Did I try to cheat? Because I don't know how to grow the money and I didn't want to lose the money, now I am supposed to go to the outer darkness? How fair is this? Do you see why that particular parable, the parable of talents, creates lots of confusion? Because people really don't know what this parable is all about. And traditionally, people are going to look for all kinds of analogies and allegories. But yesterday we learned one very important part of the parable understanding is we need to see the parable within the context of the Bible and see, actually of the gospel, and see whether this parable has interpretation or this parable illustrates something. Let's recall. If a parable has interpretation, where should we look? Further down in the text. If a parable has illustration, where should we look? Above in the text. Well, unfortunately, I don't have my screen, but if you remember the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 25, the parable of the talents follows directly the parable of 10 virgins. We will talk about that parable later, but it's not logical that a parable would illustrate another parable. Makes no sense. So maybe we should look further down the text and discover maybe something is here, which may be an interpretation. So how about reading a little further? Matthew 25, starting from verse 31. That's where we left off. And hear what it says. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and the holy angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory, and the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them one from another, as shepherd divides his sheep from the goats. Ooh, that seems to be very interesting. What did we just read? What have we just read? We read about the Son of Man. Son of Man is who? Jesus, who comes with his glory, in his glory, and with his holy angels, and he gathers all around nations around him. Well, do you think that the phrase up above in the parable of the talents, particularly verse 19, which says, after a long time, the Lord of those servants came and settled accounts with them. Make sense? The Lord or the master of the servants come and settle an account with them is equal to Son of Man coming with the angels and all the nations in front of him. So you see, it could be that what follows in chapter 25, starting from verse 31, is actually explanation of the parable. Let's see what we can extract from this explanation. Let's go back to Matthew 25:31. We read 32. All nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them one from another. Oh. The servants were also separated. There were two good servants and one unfaithful servant. So he will separate one from another as shepherd divides his sheep from the goats. That's kind of an interesting Middle Eastern imagery. 20 years ago, I went to Jordan with the archaeological expedition from Andrews University, and I decided to try myself on an archaeology dig. And so, to be honest, I didn't find myself a talented archaeologist. Every day I had a very exciting findings. Dirt. But when this dirt is lifted from the ground, then you sift it, and inside the dirt you find potsherds and bones. So we were told, not only me was like this, everybody on that archaeological site in that year was finding exciting dirt. Then later they kept digging and they dug the pool and interesting other things. But back then in the season of 1997, we just didn't have our luck. And we were sifting and finding bones and potsherds. And we were told to bring the bones to our station, put them in a bucket and wash them, and potsherds too. And then the two different archaeologists were dealing with our potsherds and bones. So when I take my bucket with the bones to a bone archaeologist, he would sort through this like this: camel, cow, sheep, goat, sheep, goat, sheep, goat, sheep, goat. You know why? Technically, if you find a bone of a sheep, it could also be a bone of a goat. And so you can't really tell very often, because in the Middle Eastern flocks, which are today, you can see it when you go to Israel and Jordan, you see the Bedouins and the sheep herders just rounding up their flocks, bringing them to milk and things like that. The sheep would always graze with the goats and they mingle. But at a certain period, a shepherd needs to separate, especially when the shearing comes, because you don't want to mix the wool from the goat with the wool from the sheep, because it will not work the same way on a spindle. And so this is why its analogy is very practical and relevant there. They understood it. So verse 33, he will set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. Then the king will say to those who on his right hand, "Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world." Ooh. A very similar phrase is spoken toward the two servants who brought the gain. Look at this language. Verse 23, for example. "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord." See? Enter into the joy of the Lord here. And in verse 34, it says, "Enter into the kingdom, inherit the kingdom prepared for you." So these two groups of people who are similar like to the sheep and goats, they're like the two different servants. The ones who brought the talents and the one who didn't bring the gain on the talents. So the ones who are the sheep, they are invited to inherit the kingdom in the same way as the two faithful servants are invited to enter into the joy of the Lord. You see? So let's take a look at the alternative. Verse 41, then he will say to those on the left hand, depart from me, you cursed, into the everlasting fire, prepared for devil and his angels. Do you remember what was said to the unprofitable servant? Verse 30, he is cast into the outer darkness. You see? Very often I hear this kind of phrase about the passage in Matthew chapter 25, verse 31 through 41, that this is a parable of sheep and goats. No, this is not a parable. This is the explanation of the parable of talents. The same way as how Jesus explains about the weeds and tares. He says the field is the world, the weeds are the sons of kingdom, and the tares are the sons of the evil one. That one is harder. First of all, we don't have a specific statement, oh, this is an explanation. Second, we don't have like, oh, the servants are the sheep. We don't have it. But we have parallels. And the language is the same. The Lord comes and makes and settles account with his servants and separates them into two categories, faithful and unfaithful, profitable and unprofitable. Here, in explanation, the Son of Man, Jesus, comes with the cloud of heaven and begins to settle account with the nations, separating them. To the right are the sheep, to the left are the goats, and the sheep are going to inherit the kingdom, and the goats are going to the fire. The same way, the profitable servant is going to enter into the joy of his Lord, while unprofitable servant is thrown into the utter darkness. You see the logic? Putting these two together helps us to understand the parable of talent. But before I gave you the unknown part of the parable of talent, I want to point something to you. Go ye cursed depart from me, you cursed, into the everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. Inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. So, one group inherits the kingdom, another group goes into the fire prepared for devil. When is it happening? It says here very clear, when the Son of Man comes with his glory. Wait a second. Jesus just gave us the teaching about the judgment. And it is very clear that Jesus here, that's actually not the investigative judgment. This is a final judgment. Yeah, this is very clear that the judgment occurs at the coming of Jesus. At the coming of Jesus, not after death. You see, this is what unfortunately the majority of the Christians believe. I remember the memorial services after the Sandy Hook shooting and how all these children were buried, and the pastor after pastor was talking to the grieving parents and relatives of those first graders, telling them that their children are watching at this funeral procession from heaven. It was a very little comfort. I could see that. It was a very little comfort. And the big problem is that if we cannot believe it both ways. We either believe it believe in the second coming of Jesus. And those who believe and place their hope in the second coming of Jesus, in Latin are called Adventists. That's right. If you believe that the blessed hope and the resolution of all evil in the world is happening at the second coming of Jesus, you're Adventist. Because that's where you place your hope, in the advent of Christ. Well, what's the alternative? The alternative would be placing the hope and expectation in your own death. Because if you believe that if you die, you either go to heaven or to hell, then you don't need the second coming of Jesus. Really. Because if you die and go to heaven or hell, then what's this business with sheep and goat is actually happening? Think of this. Somebody dies righteous and goes to heaven, and then Jesus comes. So he's the sheep. He's already in heaven. So Jesus has to call him up from heaven, set him on his right side, and said, "All right, my friend, go enjoy." Thank you, Jesus. I'm already enjoying it. Then, otherwise, if somebody is sitting already in hell, so what is Jesus going to do at his second coming? What's the point of Jesus' second coming? Pull him out of the hell and says, "Ah, you bad fellow, did you enjoy in this fire? Go back." It makes absolutely no sense. In the understanding of how God deals with evil, you can be only two ways. You're either Adventist, and here I'm talking about the way people think, not that people necessarily belong to the church organization named as Seventh-day Adventist Church. That's not the subject of this conversation today. But I'm talking about how people think as Christians about the second coming, how they view the second coming. If second coming is your blessed hope and you are expecting it dead or alive, it means you're Adventist. You're thinking Adventist. But otherwise, you just need to expect your own death to see God. I'm not sure if that's really making any sense, but there are two alternatives. According to what I read in Matthew 25:31 through 41, Jesus definitely supports those who think like Adventists, promising his glorious second coming, and then the final judgment where everybody is determined to be either sheep or goats. Okay, that was just a little sideline on the text, but let's go to the parable. If this text, Matthew 25:31 through 41, is the explanation of the parable of the talents, and we realize that the Lord of the servants is the Son of Man, and his return from the trip is Jesus' coming on the clouds with the angels, if we realize that the two profitable servants are the sheep, whereas the unprofitable servant are the goats, if we realize that the phrase "enter into the joy of my Lord" is invitation to inherit the kingdom, and throwing of the unprofitable servant into the outer darkness is equal to sending the goats into the everlasting fire prepared for the devil and his angels, then what's the talents? In order to understand what the talents is, we need to just look and see for what specifically are the sheep receiving the right to inherit the kingdom. What did they do? What's the criteria? How do you determine whether somebody is a sheep or a goat? Well, let's just read. It explains right here. "Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world." And now there is an explanation. "For I was hungry, and you gave me food. For I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." Then the righteous will answer him, saying, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and fed you, or thirsty and gave you drink? When did we see you stranger and take you in, or naked and clothed you? Or when did we see you sick or in prison and came to you?" And the king will answer and say to them, "Assuredly I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of my brethren, of these brethren, you did it to me." This is what the talents are about. These are the deeds of loving kindness, isn't it? This is the parable about the money, but not about rubles, dollars, or gold coins, or shares, or credit default swaps, or any other kind of bonds. It's about Jesus' money. And Jesus' money are actually different. Because Jesus' money guaranteed do not lose value. You listen to the advertisement. Come to this fund and this fund and this fund. They will take care of your retirement. Then, in a very speedy voice, they say, the funds are not restricted, not FDA insured, are not guaranteed to lose value. Or the small print. Folks, Jesus' money don't lose value. Because Jesus' money are not produced by the Federal Reserve. Jesus' money is the riches in heaven. Why? Well, think about this. How much is your house worth? I'm not expecting the answer. Now most of the people enjoy the house values going up. But what did we enjoy, quote unquote, 8 years ago? We were horrified. Many people just would walk away from their houses because their values plunged. And for so many years, Americans were told that the number of the square feet on this earth is not increasing. That's why the real estate will be in demand. Duh. You think gold will be something valuable that will hold the value? Think again. You never lived through this, but many people those who live in Leningrad in Russia lived through the blockade. You know what people needed when German troops blockaded the Leningrad and there was no bread in the city? People needed food. If you have a golden bullions somewhere hidden, try to make your morning cereal out of the golden bullions and see how much nutritional value these bullions are going to have. They had no nutritional value because some of the speculators in the black market during the World War II in Leningrad were really selling bread for many golden bullions because for people they didn't have value. But deeds of loving kindness, it's Jesus' money. Because they never they never lose the value. They only increase in the value. Because the older we become, even though we might have accumulated some good wealth, what are we really needing? Somebody to listen to us, somebody to visit us, somebody to give us hand. Isn't that so? And this is Jesus' money. And if somebody was able to build for himself a clear, free of any debt, 12-bedroom house, if that somebody is left all alone in this house, he'll be willing to pay any kind of money to have a guest. Isn't it? That's why Jesus' money are different. And you know what? Jesus gives you his money in abundance. You don't need to look at your bank statement. You have another bank up there. And Jesus deposited enough of that. Do you believe that Jesus deposited into your account ability to feed the hungry, to help the poor, to clothe the naked, to visit the sick? That's what Jesus deposited to everyone's account, with only one stipulation: use it or lose it. Because we are responsible for this money. And unlike the gold or dollars, which I don't know how to multiply, I am responsible for multiplying the deeds of loving kindness. Do you believe that God gave us abundant riches in his money? Let's use it.